Alright, let me tell you about a night that made me swear off RV camping for good. It was supposed to be a peaceful solo trip, just me, my RV, and the open road. I'd always loved the idea of getting away from it all. No distractions, no noise, just the quiet of nature. But after that night, I realized that sometimes the quiet can be a little too unsettling. I had decided to head out to a remote campground in the woods, far away from the usual tourist spots. It wasn't on any maps, just a place I'd heard about from a friend who said it was perfect for solitude. The drive was long, and the road became more of a dirt path as I got closer. No cell service, no other campers, just me and the trees. By the time I parked my RV, it was late afternoon, and the sun was already starting to set behind the mountains. I set up camp, had a quick dinner, and settled into my RV for the night. The first couple of hours were peaceful, with nothing but the sound of the wind through the trees. I was feeling pretty good about the trip, exactly the kind of escape I'd been craving. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a sound outside. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. Footsteps. At first I thought maybe it was an animal, a deer or something wandering by. But then I realized the steps were too heavy, too deliberate. Someone was walking around my RV. I sat up, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe another camper had shown up late, or maybe I was just hearing things. But the steps didn't stop. They circled my RV, slow and steady, like whoever was out there was taking their time, inspecting the place. I grabbed my flashlight and peered out the window, but I couldn't see anything. The darkness outside was thick, and my flashlight barely cut through it. But the footsteps continued, moving around to the back of the RV now. I started to feel a rising sense of panic. I was out here, completely alone, with no cell service, and no way to call for help if something went wrong. I sat there, frozen, listening. The footsteps stopped for a moment, and everything went silent. I thought maybe they'd left. But then came a soft scratching sound at the door, like someone was trying to get in. I bolted out of bed and grabbed the only thing I had for protection, a small pocket knife. My hands were shaking as I stood by the door, listening to the scratching continue. It wasn't frantic, it was slow, methodical, like whoever was out there knew exactly what they were doing. I yelled out, "Who's there?" hoping to scare them off, but there was no answer. The scratching stopped, and for a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. And then the footsteps started again, circling the RV once more. At this point, I was sweating, trying to think of what to do. If they were trying to break in, they could easily get in. An RV door isn't exactly a fortress. I kept the lights off, hoping whoever it was would think no one was inside. But deep down, I knew they knew I was there. After what felt like hours, the footsteps finally stopped. I waited, tense, for any sign that they might come back, but everything stayed quiet. I didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. I just sat there, knife in hand, listening to the eerie silence outside, every little creak of the RV making me jump. When the sun finally rose, I cautiously stepped outside. There was no one around, no sign that anyone had been there. But when I looked down at the dirt around my RV, my stomach dropped. There were footprints, human footprints, circling the entire RV, over and over. They had been out there for hours, just walking in circles. I packed up my things as fast as I could and got the hell out of there. To this day, I have no idea who was out there, what they wanted, or why they didn't try harder to get inside. But that night changed everything for me. I haven't been RV camping since, and I don't think I ever will again. Something about the way they just circled, watching, waiting. It was like they were toying with me, and that's what scared me the most. Because sometimes, the real danger isn't in the wild animals or the elements. It's the people out there, the ones who know you're alone, vulnerable, and miles away from help. It was the start of summer when I decided to take a solo road trip in my camper van. I needed a break from the city and thought some time alone in nature would be refreshing. I packed up my things, filled the tank, and hit the road, eager for some peace and quiet. The first few days were perfect. I explored small towns, enjoyed scenic routes, and camped at beautiful spots each night. By the fourth day, I found myself in a remote area surrounded by dense forest. The isolation was exactly what I had been looking for. That evening, I parked my van in a small clearing by a lake. The water was calm, reflecting the setting sun. I made a simple dinner, watched the stars come out, and felt completely at ease. Before heading to bed, I made sure all the doors were locked and the windows were secure. I felt safe inside my little mobile home. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange noise. It sounded like footsteps outside my van. My heart started racing as I listened closely. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving around the van. I lay still, barely breathing, trying to hear more. After a few minutes, the noise stopped. I told myself it was probably an animal and tried to go back to sleep. But the quiet didn't last long. A soft tapping sound on the driver's side window jolted me awake again. My stomach twisted in fear as the tapping grew louder and more constant. Gathering my courage, I peered through the curtains but saw nothing. Minutes felt like hours as the tapping continued. I didn't dare move, afraid of making any noise. Then, without warning, the van shook violently, as if someone had tried to open the door. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my location and the situation to the operator. She assured me that help was on the way, but it would take some time due to the remote location. She stayed on the line, trying to keep me calm. Meanwhile, the shaking and tapping stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I felt trapped, too scared to move. Eventually, I heard the distant sound of sirens. Relief washed over me as they grew closer. When the police arrived, they found nothing outside the van except some footprints. Whoever or whatever had been there was gone. The officers stayed with me until morning, helping me pack up and suggesting I find a safer place to camp. I decided to cut my trip short and head home. The peace and solitude I had sought were now ruined by fear. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves and crack of twigs made my heart race. When I finally reached the safety of the city, I breathed a sigh of relief. But that night, as I lay in my bed, I heard the same slow, deliberate footsteps outside my window. My heart froze. The city lights offered no comfort. Whatever had stalked me in the woods had followed me. One weekend, I decided to go camping by myself. I needed to get away from the noise, so I packed my things and drove to a quiet spot in the mountains. The drive was long, but the view was amazing. Tall trees, a clear sky, and the sound of birds made me feel calm. I found a spot next to a small stream, set up my tent, and started a fire. As the sun went down, I cooked a simple meal and enjoyed the peace and quiet. As it got dark, I decided to get some sleep. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound outside my tent. It sounded like footsteps. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, but the footsteps were too heavy and slow. My heart was racing as I lay still, listening. The steps got closer, and I could hear them moving around my tent. I held my breath, hoping whoever or whatever it was would leave. After a few minutes, the noise stopped. I waited, but everything was quiet again. Eventually, I fell back to sleep, though I was still on edge. The next morning, I found large footprints around my campsite. They looked human, but were much larger than any I'd ever seen. My mind was filled with questions, but I knew I had to stay calm. I decided to pack up and leave right away. As I walked back to my car, I felt like someone was watching me. Every noise in the bushes made me jump. I tried to stay focused on the path and not let fear take over. When I finally reached my car, I felt a huge sense of relief. Driving back, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was following me. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, but the road was empty. Once I got home, I locked all my doors and windows, finally feeling safe for the first time in hours. The experience stayed with me for weeks. I couldn't explain the footprints or the feeling of being watched, but I learned to trust my gut. Sometimes, nature isn't as peaceful as it seems. Now, I always go camping with friends and make sure we're in a well-known area. That trip taught me to respect the wilderness and the unknown that comes with it. But even now, when I lie in bed at night, I sometimes hear those footsteps circling my tent. And sometimes, just sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling those same eyes watching me from the shadows of my own room. I never figured out what was out there, but I know one thing for sure. It knows where I live.